Hey guys, welcome to this EQ tutorial. By the end of this video you should have a rough idea of how to use an EQ and how each frequency band should sound like. Okay, so I'm here using a session that I made, never actually finished or published. So first I'll play it with the raw vocals, and then I'll play it how we'll end up sounding. It's happened once before, behind the white oak door, and it destroyed the trust, it turned it into dust. Now you question me, I'm no longer free, and I guess that's good, cause that's what I would do. Now with the processed vocals. It's happened once before, behind the white oak door, and it destroyed the trust, it turned it into dust. Now you question me, I'm no longer free, and I guess that's good, cause that's what I would do. Yes, that one has reverb and etc, but I'm going to be talking about EQ only. I'm just going to simply be using Logic's default EQ just to show that you don't need a fancy EQ to do any of this. Let's start with sub from 0 to 100 first. Boost that and cut all of that down to 100. It's just rumble, mumble, you can't actually hear a word they're saying. So I would usually cut all of this, but let's go ahead and do that. Before. Now you question me, I'm no longer free, and I guess that's good, cause that's what I would do. After. It's hard though, I feel low. It reduces the mumble and fumble. Now from 0 to 100 I would call the sub bass. Going into 100 to 200 hertz, roughly between that area. That's what I call the low end. It's the lowest end of warmth. It's usually what radio announcers use to have that, really thick, powerful sounding rumble. I'm just going to boost that so you can hear what it sounds like. It's happened once before, behind the white oak door, and it destroyed the trust, it turned it into dust. Obviously we don't want too much because otherwise it would just sound very muddled and very boomy. An example, within the mix, it won't sound great. It's happened once before, behind the white oak door, and it destroyed the trust, it turned it in. So within context, imagining this is what I finally ended up doing for my EQ, which I don't recommend you do this. This is what it would sound like with all the reverbs, pitch correction and all of that. It's happened once before, behind the white oak door, and it destroyed the trust, it turned it into dust. Now you question me, I'm no longer free. So that's the difference. The first one you can hear it's way too much, and the second one it just feels like there's no body to it. I would boost it slightly, so that just gives it a little bit of oomph and body and warmth. So this is before. It's happened once before. This is after. It's happened once before. Now moving on to 200 to 300 hertz, still within the low end. This is also warmth. It's really important, however, because if you remove it, the vocals become harsher usually. So let me just show you. So this is before. It's happened once before, behind the white oak door, and it destroyed the trust, it turned it into dust. Now after. You question me, I'm no longer free, and I guess that's good, cause that's what I would do. So by removing that 200 to 300, I am exaggerating it obviously, but it would still make the voice harsher. So moving on from the 200 to 300, going into the 300 to 500 hertz. This is where the boxiness of the voice sounds. The boxy sound also comes from the room sound, so I purposely recorded this in a very bad acoustically treated place. I would just leave it because I know I'm going to add other reverbs. Okay, now we're moving on to the mids, but start off obviously with the low mids. I would say the low mids really starts off at roughly 600 to 1k, I would say. It has a little bit of warmth. It still has the boxiness from the 300 to 500 range, not as much. So if you boost too much of it, you can get a very boxy sound. But this is where a lot of the body lies. We talked briefly about body in the 100 and 200, where it gave some of the oomph. Here it's where all the definition of the voice is, where all the important detail is. So I'm just gonna boost 600 to 1K a lot so you can get an idea what it sounds like. It's happened once before, behind the white oak door, and it destroyed the trust, it turned it into dust. So you see, you're still getting the boxiness because I've boosted crazy amounts, 11 decibels, but it also has a lot of body, so just boosting that, which I don't think I need in this vocal. Now, the mid-range, I would say, is from, again, roughly 1.5 kilohertz to 2.5 kilohertz, so around this area in blue. This is where the presence of the vocal is. So if you boost it, it really pops out of the mix. However, if you cut it, the vocal disappears. And I'm going to do that with the whole mix on. But I'm going to move on to the second part of the chorus. So I'm going to add all the effects and then boost this 11 decibels. Again, usually you're not going to do this. So you can really see how much the vocal pops, even with compression and stuff like that. And I'm going to absolutely remove 12 decibels off of it to see how it sounds like. So as you can see, as soon as I removed that frequency band, it all of a sudden the voice just disappears. You also might have noticed that when I boosted it, not that much, but when I boosted it, it became really nasally. And that's the problem with fiddling around with this mid-range. Colt Capperine made a video about the magics in the mid-range, and he's 100% right. The mid-range is the thing you have to start off with when mixing. Moving on to the 2.5 to 3.5K range. This is truly where the nasal sound lies. It's where the sinus cavity of the vocal kind of is. If you cut this frequency too much down, you lose absolutely all of the presence. It becomes nasal-less. So it just becomes weird. So I'm going to show you that by putting that to 3K and just cutting, and I'm going to show you what it sounds like, again, within the mix and with all the other effects on. The voice all of a sudden just went to the back of the hall and is like really far away. So now I'm going to do the opposite and boost it like crazy. Now, it's right in front of your face, so obviously never turn this up that much unless you really need to. It just gives it more presence in the mix and it's easier. This is also really important. As you can see, I'm not boosting it this way because that's just going to boost like a very minor frequency. You want to boost it slightly large curve. This is because it's more natural to do this. Now, getting closer to the upper mids, 4K to 5K is the worst area because too much never sounds good, and too little never sounds good as well. This is the most sensitive area. Too little, it just becomes really hard to understand what the voice is saying, and too much is just really harsh and piercing, so you want to be able to balance it right, and I'm just going to show you what that sounds like. Obviously I'm cutting 14 decibels, which is not really realistic, but sometimes it can get to a point where it's not sounding very clear. This is what happens when you cut too much of the 4K to 5K area. It just becomes hard to understand. If you boost it, it just becomes really harsh. It makes it brighter, but not in a good way. Now, you do want some of it. Depending on the vocal, 1 or 2 decibels will do, which it will just tighten up the vocal and make it clear. This leads on nicely to the high mids. For me, the high mid starts from 6K and roughly till 10K. This area is very important for the clarity of a vocal. This frequency is less harsh than the 4K. Also, reducing 6K can fix the tinny vocal sounds and the vocal that lacks warmth. Let's boost that now and see what we get. You're by my side, it hurts inside, it's hard to breathe. It's what was right. So as you can see, it's not as harsh as the 4K, but it does make it tinny. Cutting too much of it makes it very hard again to understand. So now it sounds like between me and the microphone there was some kind of wall. I tend to boost it slightly for mostly every vocal. Okay, so that's now slightly better. It has a little bit more clarity. So now moving to 7K to 10K. This is really where the sibilance of the vocal is. And I don't tend to use this plugin because it doesn't have dynamic EQ that I know of. So I tend to use this free plugin, TDR Nova by Tokyo Dawn Labs. I can compress each frequency to reduce the amount of sibilance. I band solo it, I go to 8K, and you'll hear the sibilance in the vocals. This is roughly the area where the vocal sibilance is most prominent. Now I can use this dynamic EQ to just compress that 7 to 10K area, which means every time I say an S or a T or use any sibilance, it will reduce just that area. Now, moving on to the top end now. This is from, I'd say, 10K to 16K, so this area. Now starting with 10K to 16K. So 10K to 16K is really the top end of the vocal. A lot of people get confused, but it's not what people say, the air. This is actually sizzle. This is really harsh. Going roughly to 13K and boosting that, you'll hear that it's not air. It doesn't sound like you're giving the vocal more space. It just sounds very sizzly. So you can hear that, that's just sizzle. The air, I would say, usually starts from 17K upwards. So if I boost this up now, that's air that the voice has. So that's the whole frequency spectrum. I hope that was useful. If you did like it and you thought it was useful, please give it a like and consider subscribing.